Marie and Leah and Chris around bail issues and other things that are tied to jails and carceral conditions within the state of Michigan. So wanted to make sure that we tried to provide some information and background around a particularly relevant actor when it comes to jails, carceral conditions, and things like that, which is the sheriff. So I am going to be talking about some of the different aspects of the sheriff position generally, but want to make this whole presentation as interactive as possible. So if there are questions and things like that, definitely feel free to raise your hand. Marie or Leah, Marie, if you do see people raise their hands and whatnot, feel free to flag me. I might be a little distracted with the presentation, but would really appreciate that. But I, again, don't want to make this as lecture-y as possible. Try to make this fairly interactive. And again, this is an overview of the role of the sheriff, but the sheriff particularly is a pretty complex actor in the criminal legal system. There's a lot of different variations between sheriffs in different counties and different states and things like that. So this is going to be, to some extent, an overview of their role, not too much into the nitty gritty because of the differences that can exist on a county basis, but want to provide somewhat of a high level perspective. So if there are things that are missed or things that you think should have been included, we'll try to reserve some time at the end to make sure that we have some room for discussion on those different topics. And generally, I think it's worth noting to keep in mind throughout this presentation that the main focus on all of our work is trying to create actual safety within communities. So just keep in mind in the back of your heads what kind of role the sheriff is playing with respect to creating safety in communities. Are they not? And what other things could we be doing to actually create the sort of safe communities that we're hoping to achieve? So next slide there, perfect. We love a transition. Okay, so just as a brief overview of the different things that I'm gonna go into in this presentation, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the history of sheriffs themselves. I always like to talk through and think about the history of these different actors, particularly when talking with fellow abolitionists who are interested in, creating something entirely new. As the scholar activist Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, abolition requires that we change one thing, everything. And in order to do that, we want to fully understand the different systems that we're trying to move away from so that we don't replicate them as we're creating the sort of safe and healthy communities that we're all interested in creating. And then from there, I'm going to go into a little bit of what I like to call sheriff by the numbers. It's essentially an overview of different things like the size of sheriffs throughout the country with some particular emphasis on Michigan and their different budgets. So what are the resources that are going to sheriff's departments and where are your tax dollars essentially going? How much money do they get and what other things could we actually be spending that kind of money on? And then from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different powers that sheriffs have. Again, like I said at the beginning, they vary pretty widely on a county to county, state to state basis. But I'm going to try to talk about some general trends with respect to jail or with respect to sheriff authority, particularly with some emphasis on their role over jails and their policing powers in particular. For all of that, like Marie mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to try to do as much emphasis on Michigan, specifically in terms of using them as examples, but also just using, digging in a little bit into a little bit more detail with respect to what's going on with Michigan sheriffs. And again, there's a whole lot of complexity and variation within that context itself. There's actually hundreds of regulations in Michigan alone governing what sheriffs do. So again, we're going to try to zone in on things like jail conditions and policing, but it's wide ranging overall. So starting out with some history. So the US essentially inherited the role of the sheriff from England, where in England, kings essentially appointed sheriffs to enforce various orders, laws, and to collect taxes. And in the 1600s, North American colonists over here in America wanted to essentially replicate these systems as they were creating their own governments here in the US, in which case, many of them created the position of sheriff, replicating the sort of models of government that they were used to at the time. In fact, a lot of state constitutions have the sheriff written directly into the Constitution itself because of this effort to replicate the sort of English systems that they were coming from. Specifically in Michigan, actually, the 1835 Constitution that was adopted has some specific provisions that outline some of the roles of sheriffs throughout the state, and in terms of the different responsibilities that they would have on a county basis. So these are some old photos of sheriff's offices throughout Michigan. There's the Sanilac County Sheriff Office and Eaton County Sheriff Office. Both of these photos are from the 1800s, just to give a perspective or sense of how long these sheriffs have existed to some extent. And here is just some of the text of the Michigan Constitution, or some of the different authorities outlined within the Michigan Constitution with respect to sheriffs themselves. And here is a great time to get some interactive aspects in here. So could anyone, well, for one, I'll give folks a little bit of time to digest what's here, but based off of what you see on the text here, does anything jump out in particular with respect to what the sheriff can do, how they operate, and what sort of protections that they have?
TJ, can I suggest that we read them just in case some folks are not
for sure.
able to because they're on their phones? I can volunteer to read the first one. And then we'll take
that would be great. And then if someone after Marie would love to volunteer for the second, that would be awesome.
All right, cool. So text 4, text of section 4, county officers terms combination. There shall be elected for 4-year terms in such organized county a sheriff, a county clerk, a county treasurer, a registrar of deeds, and a prosecuting attorney, whose duties and powers shall be provided by law. The Board of Supervisors in any county may combine the offices of county clerk and register of deeds in one office or separate the same at pleasure.
Text of section 6, sheriff security, responsibility for acts, ineligibility for other office. The sheriff may be required by law to renew his security periodically and in default of giving such security. His office shall be vacant. The county shall never be responsible for his acts, except that the Board of Supervisors may protect him against claims by prison for unintentional injuries received while in custody. He shall not hold any other office except in civil defense. Wow.
Thank you so much. So does anything jump out? Does anything seem like it's kind of shocking or just particularly jarring in terms of the rights that are written into the Michigan Constitution?
Lack of accountability.
Yes.
Awesome. Yes, lack of accountability, definitely. And where do folks see that in the Constitution there?
In the section 6 too, you know, in section, the text in section 6, really don't like it. I really don't. It really absolves them, excuse me, I'm all tie-tongued today, but they're absolved of any, liability. And they're saying unintentional, well, they're always going to say it's unintentional. Of course, they're not going to say, well, I intentionally broke his arm or I intentionally caused his death, so it's always going to be unintentional. So why would they not be responsible for, for this? So for me, that section really is very, very perplexing.
I have a question. How does this Constitution, and is it still followed today?
Yeah, like I said, the Constitution these provisions were enacted in 1835. So a lot of these aspects have not changed at all. These provisions that I'm reading here are still part of the Constitution, or the language or mentality behind them, or effects of them rather. And they are still followed. So when we think about things like sheriff protections, all of the different lack of accountability mechanisms that are built into sheriffs, they are very distinct compared to other criminal legal actors, in part because of this history. There is a history of sheriffs essentially being these independent agents that are working on behalf of governors, kings, enforcing laws, but with a lot of discretion and a lot of authority that doesn't go checked in a lot of different ways. Ash?
You have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, Ash.
Yeah, no, not a question. I just
You're breaking up. We can't hear you. Ash?
Can you hear me better now?
No, your audio is breaking up. Can you type the question?
No, I cannot. I'm driving at the moment.
Okay, well, we could hear you right then, so maybe you were in a better spot. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm not trying to make it quick, but the thing that stood out to me is that it's saying that the county shall never be responsible for his act. And that's interesting because even though they're elected into the county and it's like an elected seat and position, like they're not responsible at all. Like Booker said, there's no accountability, except in the board of supervisors, may protect him. Like it just talks about protection and like nobody's accountable for the actions. So that's one thing that stood out for me.
Just like Wyatt Earp. Just like those days when they hired a fucking sheriff to come in and do what he had to do and leave. It's almost the same.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I saw another hand quickly, but if not, happy to go on. Oh, Kathy. Yeah.
Okay. One comment, they say his, assuming it's a male. And second, I don't understand the first sentence that says may be required by law to renew his security periodically and default of giving such security as office will be vacant. What do they mean by security?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how that provision has been interpreted. A lot of the ways that these provisions end up getting meaning is through things like subsequent court cases where they're essentially challenged and put to the test, where courts will interpret them in different ways. So that I'm not entirely sure and that's actually a good flag for me to mention now. Love all of these questions. We are recording and we'll look back at them. And if I don't know the answer right now, definitely feel free to still ask them and we can try to do our best to look into those specifics and get back to folks. But definitely a good thing that we could look into. And another thing that I wanted to point out as this conversation about accountability is happening, one of the ideas behind sheriffs themselves is that they would essentially be held accountable by the electorate through their elections. Can anyone see bring out any problems with the idea that accountability for sheriffs would come through elections specifically?
Yeah, they could do whatever the hell they want for 4 years.
Longer than that, because it's a system. It's been from the 1800s. They've been doing it hundreds of years, just like what Jazz just put in the box and everything. it's really, it's something ugly to look at and everything, knowing that this here is what's working for us right now. Supposedly what's supposed to be working, and we know obviously that it's not. And I'm sorry I had to chime in, but it really kind of hit my spirit. It really fucked me up a little bit, and I'm sorry about that.
Well, when they say the board of supervisors may protect him, who's the board?
Yeah, it's often the county board of supervisors. So
Right.
from the origins of sheriffs themselves, their jurisdiction, what they cover, where they get their resources, or on a county basis. So we'll get into a little bit of that going forward, but I'll probably start to hop to some next sections in case there are, unless there are any other comments that folks want to make. But I do love the conversation. This is exactly the kind of interactive environment that we want to create. So feel free to keep chiming in. Right. So what were these sheriffs essentially doing at the time? Well, in these early years in America, on the Western frontier, a sheriff might be the first elected official in a newly settled area. And they would essentially enlist these citizen posses to help them, quote unquote, keep the peace internally, AKA attack outsiders at the time. So in many Western areas, sheriffs essentially served as the first and only law enforcement representatives as settlers engaged in the genocide of Native Americans and Mexican citizens on the western side of the Americans, or of America. And in the South, and these photos here are just some of the photos of some of the early elected sheriffs who were essentially engaging in this act of colonization, engaging in this act of genocide, facilitating the expansion of Western identity in different areas. And the importance of that, in part, is just to point out that the sheriffs were and are the enforcers of laws on the books. So just like in England, when they were enlisted by the king to enforce the king's laws, they were enlisted in the US to enforce the governor's laws or the state's laws or county laws that weren't being enforced in other ways. So what were the laws at the time? They were laws that were surrounded around genocide, around the displacement and erasure of different communities. So again, serving as an agent of the state in that sense, to essentially commit these horrific acts. Oh, wrong way. There we go. And in the South, as I'm sure many of you are aware already, the sheriff's authority was very intimately connected with slavery. Essentially, if you escaped a plantation, the person who was going to be chasing you down at the time would be a sheriff. And sheriffs would often even take illegal cuts from the sale of enslaved individuals. So they would pocket the money after capturing individuals and giving them up to auction, and again, enforcing the laws at the time in terms of slavery in and of itself. And the desirability of the position at the time often came from the fact that sheriffs could do things like take these illegal cuts from the sale of enslaved individuals and put on these what were known as sheriff fees for different activities that throughout different localities. So they would essentially impose all of these different fees for the services that they would provide within the county, just on their own volition, based off of their own will, the amount of money that they essentially wanted to charge for that service. So because of these sheriff fees, sheriffs at the time could easily produce tens of thousands of dollars a year, even in sparsely populated regions, just by imposing these illegal fees. And after the Civil War, when Jim Crow era laws known as black codes essentially were put on the books, individuals were charged once again by sheriffs who were enforcing the same laws that were written on often a local basis. So again, I'm sure many people are familiar with Black Code era laws at the time, but they were for things as little as loitering and rambling without a job, and not, excuse me, essentially rambling without a job and other small violations like that. And subsequently in the future, once Black people gained the right to vote through the efforts of the civil rights movement specifically, sheriffs were the folks who were intimidating Black voters, facilitating lynchings, but often by allowing mobs to abduct people from their jails that they were supervising. And the sheriff was often the most visible opponent to many of these civil rights endeavors. There were even instances of sheriffs being written about by folks like James Baldwin, who would call them the state that they were essentially hired by the Republic to keep the Republic white, and to, as he wrote about in his essay titled Crush the Serpent. And I just saw a hand really quick. Again, want to make sure I'm getting everybody's feedback and questions.
Yeah,
so.
I was just going to throw in this here because I've studied like African histories and stuff a little bit myself. And it was a means, those laws, those little feeble laws and those ones that were so ridiculous were means for them to get free labor, because then they would send them off into jails and stuff like that and hire them out. That was a way to keep the system of slavery going on, even though it had ended.
Exactly. They had a lot of work camps back then. They would arrest them and send them to work camps and make them work for 6 months or a year, and for petty crimes that didn't even make sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And thank you so much for adding all of that. Exactly the context that we want to make sure we're including. And so that is some of the historical roots of sheriffs themselves. Obviously, that does not cover all the history of sheriffs. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot more detail to cover in all of these different aspects, but want to make sure that we are respectful of folks' time overall. But, you know, with that historical root in mind, we can take a look at what sheriffs do today. So in some ways, the role of the sheriff has changed in modern days compared to in the past, partly because of developments in policing itself. So previously, sheriffs often covered counties that did not have local police departments or other forms of law enforcement in the area. So they would pop up in regions, often smaller localities that didn't have the resources to fund police departments. But as police departments started to grow and expand throughout the country, the overall jurisdiction that sheriffs covered started to shrink a little bit as well. But what's interesting is that even though the jurisdiction of sheriffs started to shrink to some extent, the amount of resources that are funneled into sheriff's departments has not actually changed that much. Actually, it's expanded pretty dramatically compared to the amount of authority or jurisdiction that the sheriffs have themselves. So as we can see from some of these numbers, we have a lot of sheriffs. There's a huge portion of employees who are associated with sheriffs across the country. So according to the National Sheriff Association, there are 3,081 sheriffs across the country, and that's just the sheriff department. So within those sheriff departments, there are the total number of employees within those particular areas. So as you can see from the chart over here, like it's a whole total of how many individuals are hired working for sheriff's department. It gets up into the hundreds of thousands, despite the shrinking authority that sheriffs have, or shrinking responsibilities that sheriffs have throughout the years. In fact, sheriff's offices have more than doubled since 1993 and have just continued to expand since then. And as I mentioned before, things like sheriffs are often written directly into the Constitution. So as we looked earlier, Michigan's Constitution explicitly notes that counties need a sheriff, that there will be a sheriff in various counties. And there are 83 counties, so there are 83 sheriffs in Michigan, which is just giving us a sense of just how much they cover these days. And it takes a lot of money to fund that amount of sheriffs, or those many sheriffs. Typically, a sheriff's department is basically among the highest departmental budgets in a given county. So things like personnel and other costs often make up the majority of those expenditures, which is, makes a lot of sense when we look at the numbers that we were looking at earlier, hundreds of thousands of employees associated with sheriffs. And if you, and a majority of these funds ultimately come from what is known as the general fund in a given county. So here, we can look at just how much of a given general fund is allocated to a sheriff's department. And why is that helpful to know? Well, the general funds can often go to a variety of different things. People can make sheriffs or counties can make the decision as to what they're allocating the resources in their general fund to. It's not specifically earmarked for sheriffs. It doesn't have to go to sheriffs. It's an active decision. And that's one of the reasons why we often say that budgets are a moral document. They show what a given county is willing to prioritize and what they're willing to put their money behind, essentially. So as you can see from the chart here, a lot of counties in Michigan, obviously this doesn't cover all of them, really prioritize sheriffs in terms of their spending. If you look a little bit more closer, Washtenaw County is the highest with 46% of their county budget going to sheriffs specifically. And we can get into that even more detail. So here I have the 2021 proposed budget for, again, the same county, looking at the general expenditures specifically. So again, general expenditures, you don't have to spend those on specific programs. You get to make a choice to some extent. And if you look a little closer at the different things that the general expenditure funds are going to, it's not equal even remotely when it comes to the different funds that these resources ultimately end up in. So can I get some folks, I mean, obviously I have some things listed here, but can I get some folks' reactions or maybe things that I haven't listed here that you're also seeing in terms of, what could be funded instead of these colossal sheriff budgets?
If I can, because I have a radio interview, and so I'm gonna have to get off just at 7 o'clock. And I did want to try to make a contribution to the discussion here. And I really appreciate what you have shared with everyone thus far. And my name is Edward Sanders, but I go by the name of Baraka. And one of the things that I would hope that you would divulge is, because I'm sure that when we know better, we do better. And one of the things that I hope you would take and share is how many people have been in our recent, in some of the Pacific County jails, like not just Wayne County, but Washtenaw County and some of the other counties that were never intended to be there in the first place. Because as we begin to take and consider endorsing sheriffs, these are the kind of things that people need to know. Some of the people that might look lustrous in terms of a potentially good candidate, I think we might look different at them if we knew that the reason that their county sheriff department is so large and have so much money going through it is because they literally put people in there to justify the continuous budget when there was no need for those persons to be there in the first place. Okay, so our state legislator have acknowledged that there are people that have been put in these county jails, but they use those numbers to get county jails and programs built. And so we need to take and know and understand that, and we need to know what kind of demands that we need to be making of these potential office holders going forward, because that's a big one. The other one is that often when we think about recidivism, our focus is normally on prisons, when in fact, county jails have the largest number of recidivism than any detention in the country. And a lot of times that is ignored. Many of the people that before they go to prison, they wind up going in and out of the county jail multiple times, which tells us that this is a place where we can take and make real intervention. Many of us are looking at the prisons and thinking if we make reforms or some abolition work done there at the back door, that it's going to make a difference, when in fact, these individuals are normally running in and out of the county jail with flags held up multiple times before they go to prison. And many of them are the most vulnerable in our community in terms of substance abusers, mental illness, or I like to take and say poor mental hygiene, and substance use and homelessness. And these are some of the ones that are most vulnerable. Not that they are actually committing crimes, but they're a nuisance. And they eventually find themselves in the penal system. Those are the kind of things I would really like to take and hear in terms of educating us about these populations, you know. And we know that many times our money is being spent in sheriff departments for things like paying for expensive special units to take and spy on other adults that are consenting in hotels and things. You know, we need to take and know and understand that those are not real crimes. We got children that comes up missing, and instead of pursuing and trying to investigate the absence of those children, we are spying on adults that are consenting between each other, okay? Where the only harm is between them. And so those are the kind of things that I would really like that, you know, that we get some education about, because some of the things that, you know, just simply saying, and it comes from a history of abuse. It comes from a history of harm, but that harm is still occurring right before our eyes. We tend to take and overlook it because they are members of our party, okay? Or they are members of our faith-based group, you know, or they're members of our race. And sometimes we take and ignore some of the tremendous amount of harm that's occurring right there. They affect, the practices affect employment in the local area. You know, it affects real businesses. It affects people's livelihood. Because if you are poor and you go into county jail, your whole life is disrupted. Everything is disrupted. Your place of living, your finances, your credit, your employment, everything. So we need to really talk about those things that are relevant to those things. And thank you. I appreciate you very much, and forgive me for running on, but I hope the things I ran on are essential to this discussion. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it's important to, we'll be discussing the particular impacts of a lot of these sheriff powers today, but we definitely want to put this all in context. We're not talking about this history just for the sake of it, these budgets just for the sake of it. We're talking about it because these sheriffs are having real-time impacts on people's lives today in terms of the violence that they're committing in communities across the country. So I very much appreciate that recentering and emphasis on different things that should be hopefully coming down the presentation. Norman?
Yeah, this 52 million, is that just salaries, or is that for the maintenance and the upkeep of the county jails also?
Yeah, so that is for, that's a combined total that you can see there of the sheriff allocated amounts. So those are things like the sheriff's department specifically, things like personnel, like you're talking about, salaries and whatnot, and then corrections specifically. So the jails, maintenance of the jails, staff of the jails and things like that. But again, this is a particular county. I want to continuously emphasize that there is some variation county to county and across states and whatnot. So it can be a little different. DeMarco? Oh, might have just been off mute for on accident. All right, so.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll just go ahead. So yeah, I mean, honestly, that was a great way to transition us, because next I want to focus on what are they doing with all of these resources. We see that they have expanded, they've continuously gotten more money despite the changing role of the sheriff over time. So what has that role started to look like, and how have this sort of impacts of sheriff manifest themselves today? So I really like this graphic in particular. I think it's a nice display and easily understandable way to get a sense of the various roles that sheriffs can maintain in communities. Again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record with this, but not all of these authorities exist in every county and every state. It will vary to some extent, but these are some of the known and frequent roles that sheriffs end up taking in particular communities. Is anything in this graphic that folks can see? It might be a little hard to see, so let me know if so. But does anything in this graphic stand out to folks that maybe they didn't know about before, or shocked generally to see as a part of the sheriff's roles and responsibilities?
Yes, this is DeMarco. It's very interesting to see all the monies that's been, where they allocate all these monies, and it's quite evident that some of these things can be questioned and looked into in order to address some of the particulars, some of the issues that I heard the gentleman before me speak on, and also some things that I have in my mind, and I'm just very interested in hearing more. So what jumped out to me is the funding, how they allocate it to various areas where potentially those things can be reallocated to be able to address some of the issues that I think are more pertinent and important. And that was it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Alexandria?
Yeah, this one I know, but I feel like it's commonly, or we may forget about it. Yeah, but the working with ICE, and I think on the county sheriff level, I feel like that's more forgot about. And I think it's worth looking into whether the sheriff's office has a contract with ICE, because I know on a local level that does exist in places. But yeah, just the levels of policing that exists. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. The contact or coordination with immigration services, ICE specifically, is not something that a lot of people are aware of, and is unfortunately more common than people assume in different counties. Now.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Just to DeMarco's point, really, it's shameful that the sheriffs encompass funding that's over 2.5 times that of childcare, public defenders, community development, and infrastructure combined. I mean, so definitely these funds need to be reallocated because it is so off the chart. These are shameful facts that, you know, this much is being applied to sheriff's departments who are subpar. We're not talking about superior, you know, systems that are in place. We're talking about those that are failing and those that, you know, are constantly just is devastating to even go into a jail to try to bail people out because of how much failures are part of those systems that are in place. So just really staggering. I'm just really appalled here. I really am. I'm sorry.
If I may add something else, and Alexandra and the group there in Dearborn, Accountability for Dearborn, and the Detroit Justice Center, their highway robbery report, they all take and emphasize something that kind of speaks to this. Anytime somebody get that much amount of money, it's in compensation for something. And that something is something that we don't have our eye on. Okay, it happens in front of us, but we don't have our eye on it. If we were to take and do the math, like what Alexandra and them did there in Dearborn, and if you were to take and do that math across the United States, you would see that agencies like the sheriff cost Black people alone billions of dollars in unclaimed tax. And this is compensation for that large amount of money. It costs Black people in America money to drive while Black. It costs them to take and go in and out of neighborhoods that have these sheriff's departments. And they are still acting as slave patrols. They're acting like they're in a sundown town or territory. And Dearborn is a good example of that. Even though the population has changed, the practice is still ingrained there in that area. It's a formal sundown town. And even though it's predominantly Arabs, they are acting in the same way that people acted hundreds of years before they even came here to this country. You know, this is what we call institutionalized racism. It doesn't matter who is exercising the institution, whether it's a Black man, a white man, or an Indian man, or an Arab person, it's still institutionalized racism. And we are talking about billions of dollars. This is billions of dollars. Dearborn alone costs African Americans something like, Alexandra, you can correct me if you're wrong, but I think you guys came up with over $1 million to just on an annual basis. Now imagine how small Dearborn is. So when you go to looking at larger places in other parts of the United States, and if you were to do the math across the maps, you will have multi-billion dollars that are coming out of African American pockets. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I mean, again, that's something that we want to be emphasizing throughout this entire workshop presentation. Where are your tax dollars going? Where are your resources going? And who are they impacting? We know it's impacting the same Black and brown communities that you all advocate in solidarity with. And it's just shocking sometimes, jarring just to see just how many resources are actually going to that specific task and that specific mission. So yeah, I definitely appreciate all of those comments. So like I mentioned before, the various rights will change. And in Michigan, the different authorities that are associated with sheriffs specifically are actually covered in Chapter 51 of the Michigan Compiled Laws, if folks are interested. It's a long document, so definitely don't want to put all the text up there. But in terms of some of the trends with respect to the duties associated in the long compiled list of laws, there are some, common authorities that come with sheriffs that include things like patrolling roads, enforcing state law, investigating traffic incidents, providing emergency assistance to individuals near highways, and providing services to cities and villages upon individual requests. So essentially what still happens, as I mentioned in the historical context, is there are all these common duties, but some local municipalities in Michigan may still not have the resources to create a police department. Obviously, we don't want them to create a police department at all, but for folks who are looking for trying to create some sort of policing in their city, but don't have the resources to do so, what they'll often do is contract or work with the county sheriff department to have the county provide those services for the locality instead. And in those instances, the sheriff is operating as the police for the locality. They're the cops. They have the same sort of authority that the cops would in a particular municipality. Yeah, Booker?
It just made me think of something in the grand scheme of things. Even when you, like if they don't completely abolish the sheriff's departments and all that, then in the grand scheme of things, the community is supposed to be involved and should be invited, and their voices all come together in developing whatever system that we come to, where these people are supposed to be working in behalf of our best interests, and that we should be at the table. This shouldn't be something that's outside of the community where we can't be involved, not just being there as a fucking listener, but being there to be somebody to say what we would like to see as a result, and all that considered.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Again, want to continuously keep in mind, like, what do folks want to do with this information? How do folks want to respond in the future? Obviously, y'all are the organizers who will, to the extent that you're interested in these issues, do the campaign planning and organizing and whatnot. But this is, again, not information just for information's sake. Hopefully it is something that can help spark action and change and the different things that y'all are already working so tirelessly on in your communities. So now mention some of the overarching responsibilities that are outlined in the various codes and regulations in Michigan with respect to sheriffs, but there are two areas in particular that I wanted to put some emphasis on. In part because it relates to the work that y'all are doing, but also because this is unfortunately some of the areas where we see some of the most harms associated with sheriff conduct. So what often comes to mind with respect to sheriffs is their role in terms of maintaining and controlling jails. So as the individuals in charge of jails in a particular county, they are responsible for things like who is booked in a particular jail, like whether or not to release individuals based on the conditions within jails, and are essentially given a lot of discretion with respect to the makeup of their jails themselves. They can release people themselves, they can book people, they can take people from other counties into their jails, which goes back to one of the things that we were talking about earlier in terms of the overall lack of accountability that sheriffs often have. They have this wide-ranging discretion to decide essentially what the conditions are like within jails. Are folks provided with basic necessities like food, access to toilets, even basic sleeping conditions? Often not. And that's because of an active decision that sheriffs are making based on the discretion and power that they have over jail conditions. So an unfortunate example that folks are probably familiar with is the Rikers jail in New York. So this is an image of the conditions, recent conditions in Rikers facility, where, the resources that are going to these jails are spent on things like personnel costs and sheriff's salaries and whatnot, while the individuals in jails are living in these conditions. And again, y'all are the ones doing the tireless work around bail and pretrial detention. These are folks who were arrested, put in jail based on pretrial conditions for the most part, and subjected to these sort of living conditions.
And it's one toilet in that one facility right there for all them guys right there. It's one toilet.
Yeah. And this is this image in particular, and the history of jail conditions themselves can be a lot to handle. It's intense conditions, a lot of violence that people are essentially subjected to because of the conditions within jails. Again, maintained by the sheriff. They have the authority to dictate the conditions that go on in terms of how their budgets are allocated, what they're spending these resources on. Obviously, as abolitionists, we aren't interested in expanding sheriff's budgets, but they have resources to the extent that they exist. And clearly, those resources aren't being used in ways to create humane conditions for the folks who are already inside.
Excellent point. Wayne County look like that too now. So if you don't have to go to New York to see it, Wayne County look like that quite often.
That's ain't no question. That's why I knew it was one toilet.
Exactly, yeah. And unfortunately, you all know because of your direct contacts with community and all the work that you're doing, but a lot of people don't know about these kind of jail conditions that people are subjected to, because there's a lot of secrecy behind jails and the various conditions that are taking place on the inside. And thankfully, there's been a lot of exposure these days in terms of often activists bringing a lot of attention to the sort of conditions that are taking place. But people have been, unfortunately, willfully ignorant for some time.
And they still haven't done nothing, though. I'm saying the system still remains because of that, where they're not held accountable. And so they can get away with it, and they do what they do up under that disguise and everything. I've been to Oakland County, it's the same way. I was on tour. I went around the country in them.
My experience is from 1975 to 2017. Okay, from the age of 17 to just before my 60th birthday. So that's my personal experience. Even after I had been convicted and sentenced to prison, I had to return to Wayne County Jail to go to probate court for my child. So I constantly took and came down to the county jail, sometimes at least every 6 months. And that's what the county jail continuously looked at, like from 1975 to 2017, when I came back to court for resentencing. Okay, so that's my personal knowledge. This ain't book reading, and this ain't somebody in the community telling me. This is my personal experience. I've seen men and women sleep in what they call the dabber baskets. Okay, baskets that was meant to take and put forks in. That's what they gave out on the sale block, because they no longer had beds available for the men and women. So they put them in something from the Wayne County morgue that was intended for the dabber.
And they illegally conduct cavity searches without the aid of a doctor or a nurse. Your introduction coming into the county is spread your cheeks, and you're gonna spread them.
I can remember when I was locked up in Oakland County Jail. It was a 2-man cell, and it was 8 of us in that cell. And what that do, the condition is bad, but it caused a lot of chaos and a lot of animosity between the inmates, because you're in such tight quarters and you can't move, and people just develop attitudes because they're angry, and you get a lot of arguing, you get a lot of fights. It's crazy, just crazy.
And sometimes the guys, those of us that was coming back from state prison to the county jail, sometimes we were put on the women's side. We wouldn't be taken over to the side with the male population. Sometimes when we came in from prison, we were put on the women's side. Sometimes our cell doors be open where we could just go mingle in between each other's cells.
Hi, folks. I want to thank y'all for sharing your personal experiences. I just want to pass the mic back to TJ so we can let you all go at a reasonable time and make sure that he gets through the rest of the presentation. But thank you again.
Yeah, no, I very much so appreciate all of that. I think personal stories and direct experience are the best ways to actually have an understanding of these conditions. So giving those kind of personal experiences and direct exposure to these conditions that we're talking about, I think is super necessary and dire for these types of conversations. So I appreciate you all being willing to share those types of experiences. And I'll make sure to go a little bit quicker through some of these other portions, but I want to make sure now you get a chance to chime in there too.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to just have this community agreement that we raise our hands and just go that route. I know we all have a lot to share and to say with regard to everything, but this is going back because my hand had been up for a while. Different people were chiming in, but basically what I wanted to say is, like, in terms of conditions we were talking about, and that was kind of, I think, on the previous slide, but the conditions, I remember back in the winter time, we did home for holiday bailouts, and it was said that the county, Wayne County, did not have heat, and we're talking about in the winter. And when we were asking about this, they kind of played like, we don't know what you're talking about, you know, that kind of thing, where you could see they're looking at each other, you know, like really not wanting to comment. So to think that they have these type of budgets and this type of funding, and they can't even keep adequate accommodations for those that they're housing is pretty pathetic. So that was all I wanted to say. But again, just if we could kind of like raise our hand or either put in the chat, you know, if we wanted to have a comment, that would be appreciative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that, bringing us back to hand raising, which we always love, but that, you know, the frustration behind where they're putting their money. Because again, the thing to emphasize here is that the sheriffs are the folks who are in charge of the jails. So they set the standards, they set the conditions. And what we can see on the slide now is that there are instances where judges and other folks will essentially find that, you know, sheriffs should have done more. They should have created better conditions within the jails that they have now that should not lead to the kind of horrific conditions that we're seeing, but also the deaths of many individuals in jails under the control and authority of sheriffs themselves. But unfortunately, when it comes to most of those deaths and other forms of violence within jails, when those particular instances end up happening, it's the sheriffs themselves who are investigating themselves for the sort of misconduct that took place. So in a lot of cases, it will just be the sheriff's department responsible for investigating and things as severe as a jail death. So obviously, if we're having sheriffs who are like all criminal legal actors, interested in maintaining their own power, authority, not interested in giving up the sort of power that they have to commit the sort of harms that they're committing across the country, they're not going to be investigating themselves with the eye of removing their power, taking any resources from the sheriff department already. Instead, their focus is going to be on protecting sheriffs, protecting the power that they have, and making sure that it isn't changed in any capacity. And in some cases, as in Michigan, there will be nods to independent investigations within jails, but these investigations often are not independent in any actual sort. So in a recent jail death in Monroe County, there was an investigation initiated by the sheriff's department surrounding the death, what happened with respect to the death, what conditions led to the individual's ultimate death. And in order to give the idea that they were conducting an independent investigation, they hired folks from the mission team, which conducts an investigation within the jail around the specific context of the death. But that team comes from the Michigan Sheriff's Association. Can anyone mention why it might be problematic to have the Michigan Sheriff Association be the person responsible for investigating the deaths involved with Michigan Sheriff activity? Yeah, Alexandria.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's this, it's like police policing themselves. So I mean, if if you think of that on a local level, what that looks like, sure all of us know, it's quite the same for the Sheriff's Association to do that. And considering like unions and things like that, they have an interest in this continuing and benefit from that. So yeah, just bad idea altogether.
Associations advocate on behalf of sheriffs. So again, are they going to be interested in doing anything that takes power and resources from their demographic, their population that they work on behalf, supposedly work or do work on behalf of? Likely no. Instead, they're going to try to protect the power and resources of the same people that they work with and people that often include themselves as sheriffs or former sheriffs or people that they're in community with. Booker?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a conflict of interest, anytime there's, what other parties, what other parts of society that's working in behalf of when there's an issue that they work just without having any outside mediation. That just doesn't make any sense. That means people can run their own kangaroo courts. They have full, control of what they do without having accountability. That's not what accountability looks like.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for that. All right. And the power and authority of sheriffs don't just end there, though, with respect to jails. Like I mentioned before, they often are enlisted by local municipalities to essentially serve as the police force in a given local government. But both on a county basis and on a local basis, sheriffs often have the authority to conduct arrests and essentially engage in the same sort of police activities that local police officers would be engaging in. So as you can see on this chart over here, the sheriff's department, and this is for total arrests nationwide, make up a pretty large chunk of arrests throughout the country, almost 20%. And with respect to police murders, they make up, again, a large chunk of the deaths, or responsible for a large portion of the deaths committed by law enforcement. And that's because they have the same authority to use state-sanctioned violence against the same Black and brown communities that police are patrolling. They're just patrolling them on a county basis or with county authority instead of the same sort of local municipality authority that often comes, unless they have that particular contract. But the point to draw out here and emphasize here is that in many situations, police or sheriffs are essentially creating the same sort of violence and responsible for the same sort of violence that we see on the news, constantly responding to in terms of police violence, police death. And then the last thing that I just wanted to draw out in a little bit more specificity, just because I know it's something that is particularly important to a lot of the organizing going on in Michigan and across the country right now, is their relationship to traffic stops. So one thing that I mentioned before in terms of the general trends in Michigan with respect to the right or the power and authorities that sheriffs have, which also translates to most other states, is that they are largely responsible or often responsible for patrolling roads, for enforcing laws on highways, and providing other services on roads and county roads in particular. And in doing so, they are responsible or able to engage in the same sort of violence that police officers are known for with respect to traffic stops. So the same racial disparities with respect to stopping individuals, Black people while driving, ticketing, all of those different instances are unfortunately still associated with sheriffs. Again, they have the power to arrest. They have the power to use state-sanctioned violence in these different instances. So the ultimate effects and ramifications of their activity in policing or in traffic stop is going to be the same as police. And unfortunately, again, as I know you all are aware of, the reality of what that means for Black and brown individuals is that they're just subjected to even more policing that could lead to the loss of their life. So in addition to local municipalities, now we could be aware of the fact that there's another layer of policing taking place on the roads. So a double occupation of sorts with respect to the amount of law enforcement that can, take the lives of individuals who are just trying to go about their day-to-day lives. And yeah, and I know that's a lot, and I know that's heavy, but I did want to leave around 30 minutes at the end of this whole discussion and conversation for us to have a group conversation of sorts. I know it's a lot of information, more things, again, that we hope to dig into to the extent that there are specific questions about things that we didn't cover and whatnot, but want to leave space for folks to mention what stood out to them, what hit them the most, or any sort of reactions to the conversation that we've had so far.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you?
Hello. Well, again, I want to apologize, you guys, to everyone for my technical difficulties. I'm traveling, and I did say, out of all the respect, that I would have to leave the line to conduct the study group. However, everything you said and shared was very interesting, and I'm very curious about some things. I do have some questions that I did jot down for future discussion, but I just want to commend you on your presentation, and again, thanking everybody for the invite and everyone's participation. I learned a great deal. So in my next meeting, I hope to be given an opportunity to share, but right now I have to leave the line, and it's my prayer that everyone continue to have a great day.
Thanks, DeMarco.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
And if he wants to share those questions through you now, you can, pass them over.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure TJ gets them as well.
All right. That'd be great. DeMarco, just get those questions to me and I can forward them to TJ.
Will do.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, also I wanted to say the archaic laws that they still have that's applicable. I had said before it was almost 200 years old, but it's 188, and that's just shameful because we have advanced so far and so much from back in the 1800s. Slavery was still existing, of course, and still things have not changed. So I think that this overall presentation that you conducted, TJ, is very much something that I think many of us needed to see and to kind of understand, just how the system is so strong and and how, with all the funding that they're getting, they continue to just get more and more powerful. So I think just it really needs to be overhauled in the fact of, reallocation, prioritizing communities, prioritizing education, prioritizing mental health, even in the perspective that they had a budget of or funding of over 50 million, even in regards to that, the budget for the public defender was minuscule in that regard. So you got a big budget, but yet you don't have the resources to even accommodate that influx of pretrial detainees that's coming in. It's kind of really, really problemsome. So yeah, that was my input, but thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, like I mentioned at the beginning, one of the utilities of the history and all of this emphasis on the initial years of sheriffs themselves is to point out exactly what you said. Not much has changed. And why is that? Because the role and task of sheriffs hasn't changed either. From early years, the purpose of the sheriff was to enforce the laws of colonial America. And the laws of colonial America were focused on the movement and displacement and erasure of Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities for the sake of expansions of essentially white supremacy. And unfortunately, that has not changed. That was their focus then, and that is their focus now. The contours of that has changed to some extent, but they are still one of the enforcers of laws that are meant to achieve exactly that: move around, inflict violence, and essentially control Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities through the use of state-sanctioned violence, and emphasizing those threads that continue from their early stages to now is useful, because if we expect anything different, we can't expect that to come from the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's Department has been very clear about the things that they are trying to achieve and the focus of their work, which is not to create safety or not to even create humane conditions for the people who are under their control. Instead, it's to do things like take the profits that we mentioned earlier from the various fees that people were able to put on back in colonial America with respect to additional costs on enslaved individuals that they captured and sold to other folks. And now with the gigantic budgets that these sheriff's departments often have, despite the shrinking authority or jurisdiction compared to early days with respect to the role that they played in society, but still they have tremendous resources to do exactly that type of work. Leah?
Thanks, TJ. Uh-oh, can you hear me?
Sorry about that.
I was saying, yeah, thank you, TJ, and thanks everyone. Hi. On the movement point, I wanted to piggyback on something that you said in terms of like sheriffs since the beginning of time really functioning to restrict movement, right? And to restrict the movement of certain people, the people that we care about, the people that my lib cares about, and for the benefit, right? Like for the benefit of white supremacy, and with that comes wealth, right? And something that I don't know, I'm not speaking about Michigan, so I'm just offering this up in terms of what sheriffs have been up to in cahoots about throughout the South, and that is sheriffs and immigration, right? So it's kind of two-pole, right? The policing of it, the movement that TJ spoke of, and the literal like sheriffs at the border or sheriffs patrolling people that they suspect, right? Doing that racial and ethnic and immigration profiling, but it's also sheriffs maintaining immigrant detention facilities that are quite like jails. It's basically the immigration version of pretrial jail. When we talk about, like, when I heard, I think Nell spoke before TJ, and it was the point about the budget, right? I think Nell made the point about the budget, and something that we learned in Louisiana from hindsight. We hadn't issue spotted it, and we hadn't planned for how, like, power and white supremacy is always going to retool. But in hindsight, we learned that when the sheriffs negotiated and they agreed to kind of start decarcerating, they start be amenable to letting people on the criminal side out of jail. It was because the per diem, the per day payment that they get, right, from the budget every day, everybody that's locked up is at a cost. And it was more affordable, it's more profitable and more lucrative for the sheriff to start jailing immigrants, because the federal government was willing to pay and the state was willing to pay a higher premium to sheriffs for keeping those people locked up. And so I'm offering that up also because I know some of us are going to be in these conversations. All of us, I hope, are going to be in conversations about, like, strategic planning and campaign planning and North Stars. And it's just a lesson. It's not anything that we did in the strategic plan, but one of the lessons that we learned is that part of what sheriffs did there is when they agreed to let up on the quote unquote criminal side, they were at the same time in cahoots and filling the jails right back up with people who were immigrants. I don't know what the scene is in Michigan, but I just wanted to say that. And also, thank you again, TJ.
Thank you for that, Leah. That is super helpful and definitely something that need to keep in mind specifically. Like I said, there's a lot of different aspects of sheriff authority that we could do a whole presentation on specifically, and their coordination with ICE is one of those main examples where, unfortunately, because of their ability in many states to engage in contracts with ICE and coordinate with them specifically to fulfill ICE's goals of deporting as many undocumented individuals as they possibly can, they end up being an arm of ICE in that way and inflicting the same sort of, again, state-sanctioned violence now with the authority of immigration services, but it has, similar impacts in terms of the violence, the movement, the control over Black and brown bodies. Booker?
First of all, y'all, let's make sure that we always make sure that we are clear, because when it comes to money, if you follow the money, that's where you're going to find the corruption. I'm going to give you an example. I was on a board out and we were doing some things out in Oakland County, and we were looking into the phone system in the prison, in the jail in Oakland County, and in the contract, and Tom Gore is the Detroit Pistons owner. Okay. He owns this here company. Well, I think since then it's been put on blast. He's kind of sold it or something. But anyways, they had in the contract written where they had to have so many inmates in the county jail at some certain time. And that's how they benefited off of using the phone system and everything. So it's all comes, and this is with the sheriff's department. So I'm glad that this conversation kind of came up. And it kind of just made me think, but do your own individual investigation. I might be able to put some of it like on Michigan Liberation's website of that encounter that we actually had and what exactly happened, so that you can follow those facts and it'll give you a guideline. But it just goes to show you how deeply entrenched corporate America and everything else is with this, what's going on. Bob Barker had underwear in the prison. Let's make a deal.
Thank you. And yeah, but the whole intention behind this presentation, giving some information for sure, but also to spark exactly these, kind of thoughts about where you all want to put your energy and organizing and things like that in the future. Obviously, like I keep emphasizing, there's a lot more to dig into these specific areas, but if any of these have piqued your interest, there's ways to learn a whole lot more and ways to organize around them too. Influence authority, influence the ways in which the county board of supervisors decides to allocate their money, the ways the sheriff's department decide to allocate their money, and sometimes who is even in those sheriff's positions themselves, given that they are elected positions. All of those are, components of the amazing campaign planning and organizing that you all constantly do, and the amazing work that you are always engaged in. But want to give you as much as we can to spark those ideas that turn into the inspiring organizing that I know you all will continue to keep up. Any other last thoughts or comments? Happy to give back some time instead. I know it's late on y'all side. I'm over in Los Angeles myself, so a little bit still sunny, not in the dark just yet, but happy to wrap it up or have any other questions or comments.
I just want to thank you. And also I wanted to.
Oh, you went unmuted.
You want to unmute now?
You're muted now.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to remind everybody that we have a 3-part next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Bail Strategy 2.0, where the Awesome Advancement Project will be here conducting training. Friday, it is going to be at the Church of Messiah. It will be from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Saturday, it's going to be from 10 o'clock to 6 p.m. We are feeding you, so we do need to know how many people are expected so we can have the proper dietary menus to accommodate. And lastly, on Sunday, we will have a brunch, and it will be on the 26th from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And again, this is Church of Messiah, located 231 East Grand Boulevard. For those that participated in the first session back in December, this is that same location. The training was amazing last time. This is a continuation where they will also catch those of us that were not a part of that first session on bring you all up to date, so everything's relevant and new and fresh. And so it's going to be really, really powerful. And this is going to just kind of set us off for our pre-launch, our soft launch of our Michigan Black Mamas Day bailout, which is going to be April 17th, and our Michigan our official bailout for Black Mamas Day, Michigan Black Mamas Day bailout, May 1st. Soft launch is the 17th, and the official is going to be May 1st. So please join us and also get involved and be a part of this campaign and learn what we're doing and how we're trying to, make some changes here, y'all, for the community, for our people. Thank you.
Thanks for everybody's commitment. Stay powerful and grow closer together.
Thank you. And thank you, TJ, for sharing your expertise with us. If you all have any questions, again, feel free to pass them on to Nell, and she will make sure that we get them. And let's give TJ a round of applause.
Great job, TJ. I have a nephew named TJ. Great nephew.
Good job, TJ.
Snaps. All right. See you all next weekend or some other time. Bye, everybody.
Hey, enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.